The morning my grandmother's lawyer called to tell me I was the sole heir to her entire estate, I was standing in my kitchen in Winnipeg making instant oatmeal in a chipped bowl, still wearing the oversized university sweatshirt I'd slept in. I remember looking at the microwave clock, 8:14 a.m., and thinking I'd misheard him. The entire estate, he said again patiently. The house in Muskoka, the investment accounts, the geese, the vehicle, and all personal property. Your grandmother was very deliberate about this, Serena. She updated the will 6 months ago. I set down my spoon. The oatmeal kept spinning in the microwave behind me. My grandmother, Nana Ruth to me, had spent the last 4 years living alone in her house on Lake Muskoka after my grandfather passed. She was stubborn, independent, and absolutely refused to move into any kind of assisted living, no matter how many times my mother brought it up. So I drove up from Winnipeg twice a year to stay with her. I fixed things around the house. I took her grocery shopping. I sat with her on the porch in the evenings and listened to her stories about the 60s, about my grandfather when he was young, about the summer they first bought that property on the lake for $14,000, and everyone thought they were crazy. The others showed up at Christmas, sometimes Easter, usually with their hands out. I was not prepared for what happened next. My mother called me before I'd even hung up with the lawyer. She'd apparently been contacted too, not as a beneficiary but as a named party in a notice. Her voice was completely flat, which is how I know she was furious. Your grandmother made a mistake, she said. She was confused in those last months. We all saw it. I hadn't seen it, but I didn't say that. The family is going to contest this, she told me. I think you should do the right thing here and sit down with everyone before this gets messy. I told her I needed a few days to process. She took that as agreement. I should explain who the family is because it matters. My mother is the eldest of 3 children. Then there's my uncle, who lives in Calgary and has called Nana Ruth maybe a dozen times in the last 4 years. I know because Nana used to mention it with this small tight smile that meant she was hurt and pretending not to be. And then there's my aunt, my mother's younger sister, who lives 40 minutes from the Muskoka house and visited even less than my uncle did. She has 2 kids, a husband who works in finance, and an enormous house in Oakville that she mentions constantly. None of them ever drove Nana Ruth to her cardiologist appointments. None of them helped her sort through my grandfather's belongings when she finally felt ready 2 years after he died. None of them were there the night she called me at midnight because she thought she smelled gas and was scared. And I talked her through checking every burner and staying calm until the neighbor could come over. But here we are. The family meeting happened at my aunt's house in Oakville. I drove down. I sat in her cream-colored living room that looked like it had been staged for a real estate listing, nothing personal anywhere, no books left out, no shoes by the door, and I listened to my mother lay out their position. Nana Ruth, she said, had not been of sound mind when she updated the will. There was evidence, she said, though she didn't specify what. The fact that Nana had left everything to me, her granddaughter, not her children, was itself proof of confusion. Why would a grandmother skip an entire generation? It didn't make sense. My uncle nodded along. He'd flown in from Calgary for this, which told me everything about how much money they thought was involved. My aunt sat in the armchair across from me and said, in the voice she uses when she wants to seem reasonable, "We're not trying to punish you, sweetheart. We just think this needs to be handled properly. The house alone is worth over $800,000 in this market. There are also investment accounts your grandmother had, RRSPs, a TFSA, GIs. We think the estate should be divided equally among Ruth's children, as it should have been from the start." I looked at her. I looked at my uncle. I looked at my mother. Did any of you know she'd been to a cardiologist 4 times in the last 18 months? I asked. Silence. Did you know she was on a new blood pressure medication since February? That she had a fall in January and didn't want to tell anyone? That she'd been having trouble sleeping and I'd been helping her research melatonin dosages that wouldn't interact with her other prescriptions? More silence. My aunt looked at her nails. She wasn't confused, I said. She knew exactly what she was doing. My mother's jaw tightened. That's your interpretation. I drove home to Winnipeg that night. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my chest was tight the whole way. I kept thinking about Nana Ruth, about how she used to say, "The ones who show up are the ones who matter." I thought she was talking about life in general. I didn't realize she was talking about her will. 3 weeks later, I received a formal notice that my mother, uncle, and aunt had filed a claim challenging the validity of the will on the grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. Undue influence. Like I had somehow manipulated a woman who once told a contractor he was being dishonest to his face and refused to pay him the final installment until he came back and fixed the grout in her bathroom properly. Like anyone had ever influenced Nana Ruth to do anything she didn't already want to do. I called a lawyer in Toronto who specializes in estate litigation. Her name was Catherine, and she had the kind of calm, measured voice that made me feel like the situation was not as catastrophic as it felt. She explained what we were dealing with. Contesting a will in Ontario is not easy, she said. The standard is high. The claimants would need to prove that either Nana Ruth lacked capacity, that she didn't understand what she was doing or what she owned, or that I had somehow pressured her into changing the will. What do they actually have? Catherine asked. I don't know yet, I said. We found out soon enough. Their evidence was this. A note in the marginage of a grocery list from 2 years ago where Nana Ruth had written "Call Derek" and then crossed it out and written a different number. They claimed this showed confusion about contacts. There was also a statement from a neighbor, someone Nana Ruth had actually complained about to me, said she found him nosy and presumptuous, saying that in his observation, Nana Ruth sometimes seemed forgetful. That was it. That was their evidence. What they didn't know was that Nana Ruth had also kept a journal. Not a diary, she wasn't sentimental in that way, more of a practical record, appointments, decisions, notes to herself. Catherine and I went through it together at the kitchen table in the Muskoka house, and it was like reading the internal monologue of one of the sharpest people I'd ever known. The entry from the week she updated her will read, "Met with Mr. Hendricks again, updated everything as planned. Serena has been here every time I needed someone. The others have made their choices, so have I." I read that 3 times, then I had to go outside and stand by the lake for a while. But here's where things got worse before they got better. My uncle called me directly, bypassing the lawyers entirely, which Catherine later told me was not exactly appropriate, and told me that he thought we could work this out between family. He suggested I accept a settlement, take the personal belongings, the car, maybe some portion of the liquid assets, let the house be sold and divided. It's the fair thing, he said, and honestly, Serena, do you really want to spend the next 2 years in litigation? You're young, this will consume you. I told him I needed to think about it. I did not tell him what I was actually thinking, which was that every time someone in my family said fair, they meant favorable to us. Then my aunt showed up at the Muskoka house. I don't know how she got there before I did on that particular weekend. I think she must have driven up the night before. But I arrived on a Friday afternoon to find her standing in the kitchen going through Nana Ruth's china cabinet. There was a cardboard box on the counter. She had already packed several things into it. I stood in the doorway and stared at her. "Oh, good, you're here," she said, not even slightly embarrassed. "I was just sorting a few things. Some of this china belonged to Great Aunt Louise and really should stay in the family." "This is my house," I said. "It's currently disputed property," she said in that same reasonable voice. "Until probate is finalized. You need to put everything back," I said, "and then you need to leave." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she set down the figurine she was holding. A small blue bird Nana Ruth had kept on the second shelf since before I was born, and she said, "You've always thought you were special because Ruth paid attention to you, but you were just the one who was available. Don't confuse being convenient with being loved." I felt that land somewhere in my sternum. I didn't let her see it. "I'm calling the police if you're not out of this house in 10 minutes, I said. She left in 8, but she took the box with her. I called Catherine from the driveway, voice shaking for the first time since this whole thing started. Catherine moved quickly. She filed an emergency motion regarding the removal of personal property from the estate, and we documented everything. The open cabinet, the missing items, the timestamp on my arrival photos. My aunt later claimed she'd only been looking. The photos suggested otherwise. Things were getting uglier. At one point, my mother called me and said, in a very quiet voice, that I should consider what I was doing to the family. "Your children will grow up without cousins," she said, which was rich considering I don't have children, but I understood what she meant. She meant I was being selfish. She meant I was breaking something that couldn't be repaired. I thought about Nana Ruth, about the years she spent calling people who didn't call back. About the Christmas my uncle didn't come and she told me it was fine and I watched her set one less place at the table. About the way she'd squeeze my hand sometimes when I was helping her with something small, putting on her compression socks, reading the fine print on a prescription label, This small firm squeeze that didn't mean thank you, exactly. It meant something harder to name. It meant you're here. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in November. I took the train down to Toronto the night before and stayed in a hotel near Osgoode Hall. I barely slept. I kept running through the journal entries in my head, the cardiologist records, the signed and witnessed will, the testimony Catherine had secured from Nana Ruth's actual physician. Not a nosy neighbor, but the doctor who had treated her for 7 years and would attest clearly to her cognitive function. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. My mother sat on the other side of the aisle with my uncle and aunt, and a lawyer I didn't recognize. She didn't look at me when I walked in. My uncle did, just for a second, and then looked away. Catherine was calm and methodical. She walked the court through the timeline. She presented the medical records. She presented the journal. She presented the will itself, signed and witnessed by 2 people who had known Nana Ruth for over a decade and could attest to her demeanor that day. Clear-eyed, deliberate, in good humor, asking sharp questions about the wording of specific clauses. Their lawyer tried to make something of the grocery list. Catherine dismantled it in about 4 minutes. Their lawyer tried to suggest my frequent presence in Nana Ruth's life was itself suspicious, that the amount of time I spent with her indicated a campaign of influence. Catherine asked, gently but precisely, whether it was the family's position that visiting an elderly relative constitutes undue influence, and if so, what they believed the appropriate level of visitation would have been. There was a long pause. The judge did not take long. She dismissed the claim. She found no evidence of incapacity, no evidence of undue influence, and noted that the testator's choice to leave her estate to a granddaughter rather than her children was not in itself evidence of anything other than the testator's own judgment. She also noted pointedly that the removal of personal property from the estate prior to probate was a matter that would need to be addressed separately. I sat in my chair and breathed. My aunt had already left the courtroom by the time I stood up. My uncle nodded at me, which I think was supposed to mean something, but I didn't know what. My mother walked past me without stopping. At the door, she paused for just a moment, and I thought she might turn around. She didn't. I walked out into the November cold and called my best friend and couldn't quite get words out for a minute. She stayed on the line. Eventually, I said, "It's over," and she said, "I know. I knew it would be." I drove up to Muskoka that weekend. It was late November, so the lake was steel gray, and the trees were bare, and the house was cold when I unlocked the door. I turned up the heat and made tea and sat at the kitchen table where Nana Ruth and I used to play cards on rainy afternoons. The blue bird was still missing from the shelf, that's a separate matter, still being addressed, but everything else was exactly where she'd left it. I'm not going to tell you this felt triumphant. It didn't, really. It felt quiet. It felt like grief with a thin layer of relief on top of it, like ice forming on the lake in early winter. There, but not quite solid yet. What I will tell you is this. My grandmother knew. She knew who showed up and who didn't. She knew what her choices meant, and she made them deliberately, with a clear head, with a lawyer present, with witnesses. She didn't leave me her estate because I was convenient. She left it to me because for 4 years I chose her, and she saw that, and she made sure I would know. The china cabinet is full again now. I found pieces at a local antique shop that matched closely enough. It's not the same, and I don't pretend it is. But the blue bird is still missing, and some mornings I stand in front of that shelf and think about what my aunt said. Don't confuse being convenient with being loved. And I think about how wrong she was about which one of us was confused. The house is mine. The lake is the same lake it's always been. And when I sit on the porch in the evening, I can hear the water, and the silence feels like it belongs to me too.